People expect me to be a mother when I have never had a mother. I've had people look me in the eye, or maybe we're just making small talk in some waiting room, and they'll remark, "You're so kind. I bet you'd make a wonderful mother." And the moment that phrase hits my ears, something inside me lurches, not just from surprise or some generic aversion to the idea of parenthood, but because of a deep internal wound. I find myself thinking, you have no clue what my life has been like. Do you? It's not that I don't believe in kindness or loving interactions. It's that these people are unwittingly stepping into a minefield by suggesting motherhood is my natural destiny. Because if there's one role I've come to resent, it's that of mother, at least as life has forced me to play it. And ironically, the actual mother I had, the one, biologically, legally, and nominally tasked with raising me, was never truly there, except in all the wrong ways. Let me start at the beginning. My closest experience of having a mom was my grandmother. She was the one who fed me, sheltered me, built me up. She was the one who gave me the warmth that we typically associate with maternal love. She was present in a way my own mother wasn't. My grandmother had her own flaws, plenty of them, and the older I get, the more I see them. She neglected her own children in various ways, or so I've heard from my mother and others. But when it came to me, and to some of my cousins, she provided a level of care that was more motherly than anything I got from my actual mom. She died a while back, leaving behind a mixture of fond memories and complicated legacy, but she remains in my heart as the beacon of what nurturing can look like, at least in glimpses. As for my mother, she loved me, she says, until I was about 10. Loved is a loaded word, though. I recall some hazy moments in my early childhood when she'd do something nice or supportive. Maybe she'd bring home a small treat after a long day, or share a private joke. But she was a single, workaholic mother who never took leave unless I was sick. Over time, her emotional presence vanished. She'd worked herself ragged, and while I can acknowledge the economic and social pressures that weighed on her, the end result was that I was often alone or left to fend for myself. If I got ill, she'd spend those days off looking after me, but would remind me, "I'm using my precious leave for you." By the time I was old enough to notice, I realized she was hoarding months and months of unused leave. The official reason was unclear, but the result was that we never went anywhere fun, never took vacations. I can count on one hand the number of trips we had, and even those were overshadowed by her constant stress or her bringing a friend to watch me while she worked. Gradually, as I grew, my mother stopped acting like a mother and started treating me more like an emotional caretaker or a small adult. I was parentified, meaning I was forced to take on responsibilities and emotional burdens that a child shouldn't have to handle. She'd confide in me about her work problems, ask for my advice about job promotions, vent all her frustrations, and then blame me whenever I recommended something that didn't pan out the way she wanted. I was a sounding board for her fears and anxieties. As early as 10, I was giving her guidance on her career moves, a child advising a grown woman how to handle office politics. When I was 15, she wanted another cat. We already had a bunch, and I said no, because we didn't have the bandwidth. She twisted that around to blame me. "Well, you were the one who wanted cats in the first place, or you begged for them. And now look at the mess we're in." And in reality, she was the one who kept adopting strays, so that at one point, I kid you not, we had 36 cats. The house stunk of cat urine, and the day-to-day chaos was insane. But if you asked her, it was my fault for liking cats as a little kid. She'd never own up to the fact that she was the one who kept bringing them in. Let me be clear. I love cats as much as the next person. But 36 is beyond normal. Yet in her mind, I had begged as a child. So obviously it's all my responsibility. What's more, she openly prized the cats over me. Whenever I'd half joke, "You love your cats more than me," she'd retort, "It's not your fault you don't have a tail," or, "Well, you might love them too if you had a tail." She'd let vital events in my life go by undone, because one of the cats needs to see the vet. If I needed emotional support or had something going on at school, that was secondary to her menagerie's needs. By the time I was a teen, I realized she was honest about her priorities. Cats first, me second. Maybe that was her coping mechanism for stress, or she just preferred creatures that didn't talk back. I'll never quite know. All of this took a psychological toll on me. I was effectively acting as my mother's caretaker, constantly managing her emotional states, making sure her meltdown du jour didn't explode too severely. I was the adult in the house. She was the child. She'd scream at me if something went wrong, Like if the electricity bill was late or we ran out of cat food, she'd blame me for not reminding her or not doing the research. Mind you, I was still a minor at the time. In a healthy parent-child dynamic, it would be the other way around. But we weren't healthy. As I got older, the direct abuse shifted form. She no longer screamed as much or physically acted out, but the emotional manipulation remained. I'd enter my 20s trying to find my footing in the adult world. Every time I made a small error, she'd lecture me, treat me like an incompetent. If I asked for advice, she'd provide it with a heavy side of guilt-tripping. If I decided to go a different route than her suggestion, she'd punish me emotionally. It was exhausting. Meanwhile, she never sought to fix anything about her own life. She just wanted me to be her emotional sponge. That never changed. By contrast, the few times I tried to express frustration, sadness, or disappointment, she'd turn it around. "Don't be so dramatic," or "You have no idea what real problems are." So I learned to bottle up my feelings, to keep them locked away. That's why, to this day, we don't talk about deeper emotions. We engage in a superficial dance. I keep the conversation polite. She complains about her day. I nod along. We hang up all. Any attempt to call her out or ask for accountability ends in a meltdown, or, ironically, in me feeling guilty for causing a scene. I look back at the snapshots of love she gave me, the random nice memory, here or there. And those are the only reasons I haven't cut contact. It's like I cling to this fantasy that maybe she can revert to the mother she was for that fleeting time before I was 10. I keep telling myself, she was nice once. She must still have it in her, but the years go by, and the reality is, she remains the same emotionally unavailable, self-centered person. Now my grandmother, my real maternal figure, passed away, and that was devastating. She was the one who gave me unconditional love, the safe harbor. She hadn't been a perfect parent to her own kids, but she showed me genuine care. I grieved her loss deeply, but for my mother, I don't anticipate the same reaction. If anything, I feel the dread of, I'll have to help deal with her estate, her cats, her hoard of junk, because let's be honest, she's still kind of a hoarder, especially with pets, and I know her house is a disaster. The day she passes, I'll have to figure out how to wade through the wreckage. That's the sum total of my emotional reaction. Exhaustion at the notion of dealing with her mess. I'm not happy she'll be gone someday, but I don't expect myself to be in deep grief over losing a mother figure, because I never truly had one. And yet, in everyday life, random acquaintances or men I date or strangers will say, "You're so caring, so patient. You'd be a great mother one day." They see me as someone who's nurturing, who listens well. Maybe I do exhibit those traits, but they can't fathom the twisted irony in that statement, because I spent my entire childhood playing mother to my own mother. I had to carry her emotional baggage. I was the caretaker, the problem solver, the responsible adult. I have no desire to repeat that role in an actual parent-child relationship, at least not anytime soon. I'm drained beyond measure. The thought of signing up for more nurturing, more self-sacrifice, more shaping of a fragile life. My insides recoil. I've done my time, I think, far before most people do. Sometimes I wish I could articulate to these well-intentioned men. "Listen, bud, you have no idea the well of memories you're tapping into. Telling me I'd make a good mother is not a compliment to me. It's a painful reminder that I was never a child, never allowed to be carefree, always forced to be the adult. I've mothered enough, thanks, but I rarely say it out loud. Usually I just politely smile or change the topic, because explaining the whole backstory is a minefield. People get uncomfortable, or they dismiss it, or they respond with, "Oh, you'll change your mind, just wait." It's infuriating. I recognize that not everyone who suggests I'd be a good mother is aware of my background. They see kindness or empathy, and assume motherhood is the natural extension of that. They don't realize that there's a difference between showing empathy in daily interactions and the massive lifetime commitment of parenting. They don't realize how much baggage I carry around from the years I was forced into a caretaker role that stifled my own growth. It's not that I'm anti-children. Sometimes I adore kids. I can laugh with them, teach them things. In a hypothetical universe where my upbringing was supportive, maybe I'd have a different perspective on starting a family. But in the actual universe, I'm burnt out from motherly duties that were never mine to begin with. The ghost of that forced parentification still lingers. I'm still healing from it, still learning how to be my own person instead of my mother's caretaker. Truthfully, I haven't decided whether I'll remain child-free forever, or if eventually I'll adopt. or if in some twist of fate I'll conceive. But for right now, I know I'm not ready to mother anyone. I'm still reparenting myself, trying to nurture the inner child that never got a real childhood. That's a process that takes time, therapy, self-reflection. I'm learning to set boundaries with my mother, which is crucial. Sometimes I wonder if one day I'll be in a healthy enough space to be a parent without feeling like I'm reliving all the old pain. But that day isn't today, and might not come tomorrow, or anytime soon. Then there's the question of my father, who is never in the picture. I don't even know who he is, and I suspect I won't be invited to his funeral either, let alone know when he dies. That's a whole other layer of emotional distance and paternal abandonment, but that's a smaller shadow compared to the day-to-day trauma my mother inflicted. In a society that often romanticizes the mother-child bond, it feels alienating to have this kind of relationship with my mom. People assume you must love your mother unconditionally, that you'll want to spend time with her, and that you'll mourn her deeply when she's gone. But I can't lie. I feel mostly drained by her existence. She's never taught me how to be a child, so I was never a child in her presence. Instead, I was her support system, her scapegoat, her punching bag. That's not mothering. That's exploitation. So I struggle with the guilt of not wanting that archetypal precious bond, because the bond we share is warped and damaging. I also wrestle with the societal expectation that eventually you come to forgive your mother. Let bygones be bygones. People say, but she's your mom. At least she raised you, right? And I think, raised, or did I raise her? The lines are so blurred. My mother's meltdown, my problem to fix. My mother's financial slip-up. Cue my job to cover. My mother's emotional meltdown, ewy me, calmly talking her down. It's maddening. And so, I come back to that moment. A random man or colleague or acquaintance says, "You seem so sweet. I bet you'll be a fantastic mom someday." That single sentence encapsulates a swirl of thoughts. It triggers memories of the times I was forced to be fantastic at mothering my own mother, forced to handle grown-up responsibilities while I was still in elementary or middle school. It resurfaces the betrayal of never being properly cared for. It reminds me of the heartbreak I felt as a teen, seeing how normal families operated, and realizing I never had that normalcy. My mother was never the comforting, guiding presence I needed. Instead, she was the one who needed me to comfort and guide her. My frustration doesn't mean I begrudge every person who says, "You'd be a great mom," but I do wish I could gently educate them about the complexity that underlies such a statement. Sometimes, ironically, being kind or patient is a result of having to adapt to an emotionally unstable environment. I'm skilled at calming people, because I had to calm my mother repeatedly to survive her mood swings. That skill set doesn't necessarily translate into wanting to raise a child. Now, to clarify, I don't think motherhood is a curse or something no one should do. It's just not a mantle I want to pick up lightly, especially not with the emotional scars I have held. And it's certainly not an inevitability just because I display empathy or compassion. If anything, my experience has taught me that mothering is hard, often undervalued work. I have the greatest respect for those who do it well, but I also know how devastating it can be when someone incompetent or self-absorbed tries to do it. It's a cruel cosmic joke that the woman who bore me never truly mothered me. I was left with the caretaker role for the very person who was supposed to be caretaker for me, and now others see traces of that caretaker in me, praising me for it, assuming that I must want to pass on that care to my own offspring. But part of me is done caring for anyone else's emotional burdens. I'm still learning how to care for myself. In closing, I often daydream about a parallel universe where my mother was a stable, loving presence, and I grew up carefree, never worrying about her meltdowns, or finances, or multiple cats. In that universe, maybe I'd approach motherhood with a sense of joy, excited to replicate the nurturing environment I grew up in for. But in this reality, it's a different story. I cope by setting boundaries, by refusing to fulfill motherly duties for a mother who never was one. And if someone wants to praise me for my kindness, fine. But don't assume I want to be a mom. Don't assume that because I'm decent at providing emotional support, I should automatically replicate the cycle of parenting that wounded me in the first place. Maybe I'll change my mind someday. Maybe I won't. But the key is that it will be my choice, on my own terms. I refuse to let society's expectations, or random acquaintances' assumptions, or the legacy of a flawed mother-daughter dynamic push me into a role I'm not ready for. I've been a mother once already, to my mother herself, and I carry the scars. For now, that's enough. Let me learn how to be my own person. Let me reclaim some semblance of a childhood I never fully had. And let me define what adulthood looks like without the shadow of her demands. If people can't understand that, or if they still want to say, "You'd be such a great mom," well, they just have no idea what they're dredging up are.